There's something unsettling about the way we move through life. We follow patterns, obey invisible guidelines, and shape our days around expectations that nobody ever actually wrote down. We apologize for taking up space. We dim our voice in meetings. We say yes when everything inside us screams no. And we do it all because, somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves these are the rules. But what if I told you that most of the limitations you live by don't actually exist? What if the very thing that's been exhausting you, draining your energy, and keeping you small is nothing more than a collection of made-up boundaries that you've been honoring like sacred law? We live in a world of phantom rules, invisible chains that we've wrapped around ourselves so tightly that we forget we're the ones holding the key. And the strangest part? We police these rules harder than anyone else ever would. We become our own prison guards, our own judges, our own executioners of possibility. Think about it. When was the last time you wanted to do something, knew it would make you happy, knew it wouldn't hurt anyone, but you stopped yourself because it felt wrong somehow? Not morally wrong, not actually harmful, just wrong, according to some unspoken code that exists only in your head. Maybe you wanted to wear something that felt authentically you, but you changed because it might seem too bold. Maybe you had an idea in a conversation, but kept quiet because speaking up felt presumptuous. Maybe you wanted to pursue a dream, but talked yourself out of it because people like you don't do things like that. People like you. That phrase right there is the foundation of so many phantom rules. It's the invisible fence that keeps us contained within boundaries that were never actually drawn by anyone with authority to draw them. Here's what's wild about these made-up rules. They're not coming from the law. They're not coming from your religion. They're not even coming from your family, your friends, or your boss. They're coming from a voice in your head that sounds like you, but speaks with the authority of some cosmic rulebook that doesn't exist. And this voice is relentless. It has opinions about everything: how you should dress, how you should speak, what you should want, who you should be. It tells you that confident people are arrogant, that asking for what you want is selfish, that standing out is attention-seeking, that changing your mind makes you weak. But here's the thing about phantom rules. They're designed to keep you safe in a world that no longer exists. They're outdated software running on modern hardware, creating glitches in your daily experience that leave you feeling frustrated, stuck, and perpetually drained. You walk into a room and immediately start calculating how to make everyone else comfortable, even if it means contorting yourself into something unrecognizable. You have conversations where you agree with things you don't actually believe, because disagreeing feels dangerous somehow. You make decisions based not on what you want, but on what you think you're supposed to want. And the exhaustion that comes from this isn't just tiredness. It's the bone-deep fatigue of living as a stranger to yourself, of constantly translating your authentic impulses through a filter of imaginary appropriateness, of editing yourself so heavily that you lose track of what the original draft even looked like. The phantom rules whisper constantly. They tell you that success means grinding until you burn out, that rest is laziness, that boundaries are selfish, that vulnerability is weakness, that your worth is measured by how much you can do for others, while asking for nothing in return. They convince you that other people are watching and judging your every move, when the truth is, most people are too busy following their own phantom rules to pay much attention to yours. They make you believe that there's a right way to be human, and you're somehow getting it wrong. But what if there isn't a right way? What if the only rule that actually matters is that you treat others with respect and kindness while honoring the truth of who you are? What if everything else is negotiable? This realization can be terrifying because phantom rules, even though they're restrictive, provide a strange comfort. They give you a script to follow, a way to navigate the world without having to make too many original choices. They promise that if you just follow the invisible guidelines, you'll be safe, accepted, loved. But safety that requires you to disappear isn't actually safety. It's slow suffocation. An acceptance that demands you become someone else isn't acceptance at all. It's conditional tolerance that can be revoked the moment you step out of line. The most insidious phantom rules are the ones that masquerade as virtue. The rule that says putting yourself first is selfish, so you give until you're empty. The rule that says expressing anger is ugly, so you swallow your rage until it turns toxic inside you. The rule that says needing help is weakness, so you struggle alone with burdens that were meant to be shared. These rules don't make you a better person. They make you a smaller one. They don't create genuine connection. They create performance. And performance, no matter how perfect, will never satisfy the deep human need to be seen and loved for who you actually are. Here's what nobody tells you about phantom rules. They're often inherited, passed down through generations like family heirlooms that nobody questions. Your grandmother followed them, your mother followed them, and now you're following them. Not because they serve you, but because they feel like home. But inherited doesn't mean true, and familiar doesn't mean necessary. Some of the most liberated people you know are those who figured out how to question the invisible. They looked at the patterns that were draining them and asked a simple but revolutionary question. Says who? Says who that you have to earn your worth through achievement. Says who that you can't change careers after 30. Says who that you have to explain your choices to people who weren't invited to make them. Says who that your value depends on how much you can tolerate without complaining. When you start asking says who, something interesting happens. You realize that many of your most binding limitations exist only because you've agreed to be bound by them. And what you've agreed to, you can disagree with. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or inconsiderate. It means becoming conscious. It means distinguishing between rules that actually serve life and rules that just feel familiar. It means recognizing that some boundaries are worth respecting and others are worth crossing. The phantom rules that drain you most are usually the ones that require you to betray yourself in small ways every day. The rule that says your needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. The rule that says you have to earn the right to take up space. The rule that says authenticity is a luxury you can't afford. But what if authenticity isn't a luxury? What if it's the foundation of a life worth living? What if the energy you've been spending on following imaginary rules could be redirected toward creating something real? The truth is, you're already breaking rules every day, just by being yourself. The phantom rules are so numerous and contradictory that perfect compliance is impossible. You're already a rule breaker. The question is whether you'll break them consciously or keep pretending they have power over you. And here's the beautiful irony. The moment you stop trying to follow all the phantom rules, you often become more genuinely considerate, not less, because you're operating from choice rather than compulsion, from authenticity rather than anxiety, from love rather than fear. But recognizing phantom rules is just the beginning. The real question is, what happens when you start living as if they don't exist? When you first start questioning the phantom rules, something unsettling happens. The world doesn't end. People don't gasp in horror. The sky doesn't fall. And that realization can be more jarring than any punishment would have been. You speak up in that meeting, and instead of being fired, your idea gets implemented. You wear what makes you feel alive, and strangers smile at you differently. You say no to something that drains you, and the person asking simply finds someone else. The apocalypse you were bracing for never arrives. This is when you realize how much energy you've been wasting on preparation for disasters that exist only in your imagination. All those hours spent rehearsing apologies for crimes you hadn't committed. All that mental bandwidth devoted to managing reactions that were never going to happen. All that careful tiptoeing around landmines that were never actually buried. But here's where it gets interesting. The absence of external punishment doesn't immediately quiet the internal prosecutor. That voice in your head that's been enforcing the phantom rules doesn't just pack up and leave when you start ignoring its commands. If anything, it gets louder, more desperate, more creative in its arguments for why you should return to the cage. It tells you that you're being selfish, that you're getting too big for your britches, that people are talking about you behind your back, that this newfound freedom is just a phase you'll regret. It weaponizes your deepest fears and insecurities, trying to scare you back into compliance with rules that were never real to begin with. This is the crucial moment, the fork in the road, where you either surrender to the familiar prison or keep walking towards something you've never experienced before. Genuine freedom. Not the kind that comes from having no responsibilities, but the kind that comes from choosing your responsibilities consciously, rather than inheriting them unconsciously. And choosing consciously changes everything. When you decide to care about something because it matters to you, Not because you're supposed to care about it. The caring feels different, lighter, more sustainable when you set a boundary because it protects something sacred in you. Not because someone told you boundaries were important. The boundary holds without effort. The phantom rules trained you to live reactively, to scan every room for approval, to modify yourself based on whoever was watching, to seek permission for desires that required no permission. But conscious living is different. It's proactive. It starts from the inside and works its way out. Instead of asking, "What will people think?" you start asking, "What do I think?" Instead of wondering, "Is this allowed?" you wonder, "Does this align with who I'm becoming?" Instead of seeking validation for your choices, you seek alignment with your values. This shift doesn't happen overnight. Years of phantom rule following have created neural pathways that run deep. The impulse to shrink, to apologize, to second guess yourself, to seek approval before acting. These patterns have momentum, but every time you catch yourself following a rule that doesn't actually exist, every time you pause and ask "says who?" you weaken those pathways and strengthen new ones. And the new pathways lead somewhere different. They lead to conversations where you say what you actually think, to decisions that reflect what you actually want, to relationships based on who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be, to work that energizes you instead of draining you, to days that feel chosen rather than endured. The phantom rules promised you safety, but they delivered exhaustion. They promised acceptance, but they delivered performance anxiety. They promised belonging, but they delivered isolation. Because how can you belong anywhere when you're not even being yourself? Real belonging doesn't require you to shrink. Real acceptance doesn't demand you disappear. Real love doesn't ask you to edit yourself into something more palatable. And real success doesn't require you to sacrifice your sanity on the altar of other people's expectations. But perhaps the most profound shift happens when you stop trying to optimize yourself for other people's comfort and start optimizing for your own growth. When you stop asking, "How can I make this easier for everyone else?" and start asking, "How can I make this more honest?" Because honesty, it turns out, is the antidote to phantom rules. Not brutal honesty that steamrolls over others' feelings, but gentle honesty that honors both your truth and your kindness. The kind of honesty that says, "This doesn't work for me," without needing to justify why. The kind that admits, "I changed my mind," without apologizing for growth. The kind that declares, "I want something different," without seeking permission to want it. This honesty creates space around you. Space for others to be honest too. Space for relationships to breathe and evolve. Space for possibilities that couldn't exist when everyone was busy following scripts that no one actually wrote. And in that space, something beautiful happens. You discover that the person you are when you're not following phantom rules is someone worth knowing. Someone with opinions and desires and boundaries and dreams that feel genuinely yours. Someone who can contribute to the world, not by disappearing into it, but by showing up fully within it. The phantom rules told you that your authentic self was too much, too little, too something that needed fixing. But what if your authentic self is exactly what the world needs? What if the thing you've been trying to hide or modify or apologize for is actually your gift? You don't need permission to stop following rules that don't exist. You don't need a committee to approve your decision to live consciously. You don't need validation to choose growth over comfort, truth over performance, authenticity over approval. The phantom rules have been draining you long enough. The invisible chains have kept you small long enough. The made-up limitations have stolen enough of your energy, your time, your life. You already have the key. You've always had the key. The only question now is whether you're ready to use it. Because on the other side of those phantom rules is a life that feels like yours. Not the life you think you should want, but the one you actually do want. Not the person others expect you to be, but the person you're meant to become. And that person is worth breaking a few imaginary rules for.